Did you enlist?
I enlisted at the age of about 19, and I took my basic training at Fort Devens in Massachusetts, and I was there. Well, actually, I didn't take the basic training there. I just reported there, and then they sent me down to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey at that time, where I took my basic training at that time. And I had been in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, for roughly about 6 months, basic training and some schooling, and I was assigned to the Signal Corps to work on electronics, learn electronics. They taught me everything in the electrical field, which happened to be my hobby at the time. So I got exactly what I wanted, and was able to learn a lot from them.
Where were you living at the time when you enlisted?
I enlisted from Hartford, Connecticut. I had graduated. I had gone to schools in Hartford, starting with grammar school, going right up to high school. And I graduated Weaver High School in 1941 in Hartford. And it was a trying time because we became very close in our class. All men or boys of my age were going off into the service. It was a war, and we didn't know what the future was going to bring for us. So as a result, and I'll jump ahead, when we had our reunions later on in life, our high school reunions, we were very friendly, and we got along very nicely because of the circumstances at the time when we graduated.
Why did you decide to enlist?
If I had enlisted at that age, I was able to choose my branch of the service. And I have known of others that went into the Signal Corps. And I had assumed that if I got into the Signal Corps, possibly I could train in this area here in the Northeast, which I did do. And plus the fact that I got a very good schooling there as well. And the equipment they taught me was two-way radio communications, basically used by the Army, by the infantry, and so forth. And it had to do with repair of all this equipment, learning the theory first, learning how to repair them, and so forth.
And what do you remember about your basic training?
It was the month of November, and it started to get cold, and I had to get used to getting up about 5 o'clock in the morning and putting in long days. It was very strenuous, but it was very good. And of course, we had people from the old Army that were training us, and they were very strict. And we lived in tents down there. We didn't have any barracks at the time, and so it was a new type of living.
After basic training, where were you sent?
After basic training, I was shipped out of there to an outfit in South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And when I got down there, the organization left for maneuvers in Tennessee. They didn't know what to do with me, so I just stayed on this base there in Myrtle Beach until they found out what to do with me. And then they shipped me out to Tennessee, and I was on maneuvers there for about a month or two. And again, we lived in very intense again.
What is maneuvers?
Maneuvers means they were, it was like a rehearsal for war, really. They set up two sides. They distinguished between the two sides by putting white armbands around one group and others without the armband. And we simulated wartime experiences there in the area of Nashville, Tennessee, actually. But made new friends, and it was interesting, but not a comfortable life.
And where were you trained in repairs?
Where was I training by?
When you learned radio repair.
Well, that I learned in Fort Monmouth. Yeah, there was 6 months of schooling there. And they have instructors And they gave us all the information and the theory of electronics at the time. And there was mainly two-way radio communications and mobile communications from vehicles. And then from Tennessee, I went down to New Orleans, and then they taught me to repair equipment and maintain equipment for aircraft. And so then I became familiar with all the aircraft equipment as well as the infantry equipment. And so I stayed in New Orleans for a while. I liked that because this happened to be in the winter months, and it was warm there as compared to what we had in New England here. And we lived in barracks. It was fairly comfortable. I liked the city of New Orleans and so forth. And they treated us very nicely. They had a big USO organization, that's the United Service Organization, where they would treat us with coffee and donuts and provide a social life for us in town. And they had dances there. It was very good. I made a lot of good friends in this organization. And then from there, from New Orleans, I went to Mobile, Alabama, and they set up an organization where they would do repair equipment on various parts of airplanes. And it was airborne equipment only. So now we worked with radio and radar repair, and they had other specialties there, such as propeller repair, sheet metal repair, and so forth. Because this is very interesting, somebody had the idea of putting all these facilities, repair facilities, aboard a Liberty ship with about 300 personnel on there, 300 Army personnel, and a Navy gun crew of about 100 people, no, about 40 people, and they took care of the guns on board the ship. And then we had the merchant marine who actually ran the Liberty ship. So we were aboard ship, and they set up all these shops aboard the ship for repairs. And the reason for this is when they take an island, and we were headed for the Pacific, our outfit was headed for the Pacific. When they set up an airstrip on an island, they have to set up all the repair facilities aboard alongside an airstrip, provide an airstrip and so forth. But with an organization like ours, they would just take the ship, drop anchor in the harbor. They had all the facilities for repair immediately. The other way they used to do it would take about 6 months to set up all the facilities for aircraft, the repair and everything else that goes along with it. And then I found out that I was no longer in the Signal Corps. I ended up in the Air Corps. Today they call it the Air Force. That was called the Air Force right after World War II. But during World War II it was called the Air Corps, which is part of the Army. And the reason for that is they decided to set up a separate organization to include the Army, the Navy, the Marines, and the Air Corps. Before, it was only the three of them. So now I was in the Army Air Corps and aboard this ship. And we, in Mobile, we had to take basic training similar to what they train in the Navy as boot training. So we had to learn all about anything that Navy people had to learn, we had to learn. And for example, how to abandon ship. We had a big tower that we had to jump into the water from. It was about a 30-foot jump. I was not a swimmer at the time, but of course we did this with a life jacket on. And climbing those rope nets, the same as going down rope nets, the same as you would when you abandon ship in the ocean. Taught you how to swim properly when you're in the water if you have to abandon ship, because to navigate yourself if there's an oil slick on top of the water, which it usually is. So they gave us all this training, and we did have ducks. Those are vehicles that would go on land as well as on water. And we trained that, and so it was a naval training station down near Mobile.
What was the name of the ship that you were assigned to?
It started off as it's a converted Liberty ship, by the way. They set up all these shops aboard the ship, and the name of the ship was a Rebecca Lukens at the time, which would change at a later date. They changed that to the Herbert Bayou, and incidentally, there were 6 of these organizations in the world that they set up. And I think they learned their lesson in Europe or in North Africa when they were doing very well on air, but the only thing is the parts and the maintenance couldn't keep up with them. And somebody said, well, let's put all these things aboard a ship and then we would do it. And that's where this all got started. It was Hap Arnold, General Hap Arnold, who was in charge of us. We were in the 20th Air Force over there.
Now, in the papers you gave me, they called the ship's Ivory Soap. Do you know that term?
Yeah, that was a nickname because, first of all, this happened to be a top secret function, and they didn't want the public to know about it, and they gave that a code name of Ivory Soap because ivory soap floats, and that was the reason for the. So whenever they referred to this I guess whenever they referred to anything in this area and it was top secret, they referred to the Ivory Soap organization. And as I said, there were 6 of them, and now they assigned 2 smaller ships. Well, no, they had 12 smaller ones that would do basic work, and our outfit was called ARU. We were the second ARU. There were 6 of them. And ARU standing for Aircraft Repair Unit. And the other smaller groups were called AMUs, Aircraft Maintenance Units. And they did lesser work such as maintenance and so forth. And as I said, there were 6 of them in the world, and we eventually ended up in the Pacific. There's another one I know in the 5th ARU. They ended up in Okinawa, and I don't know where the others went. And so we as I said, we took our sea training or boot training in Mobile, and we left Mobile after we graduated this school, and were assigned to that ship, and we traveled out of Mobile down to Cuba. I'll give you the itinerary of where we went. To Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. We stayed there at an air base for 2 or 3 days, and then got back on the ship again and went through the Panama Canal. And from the Panama Canal, we sailed westward across the time zone. If I remember correctly, going out we had 2 Thursdays, and coming back we missed a Thursday. If that happened to be the day, I forgot what day of the week it was, but that's what happens when you cross the time zone. You end up doing the same day twice, and it's called the same day, and then going back you just miss that day. And we went to Kwajalein, and we dropped anchor there. We stayed there for a while. That was an island. And then from Kwajalein, we went directly to Saipan. And we got to Saipan, about a month after the invasion of Saipan. And we maintained the aircraft at Saipan on that airstrip. And the function of this whole thing was to take islands in the Pacific so we can get closer to Japan, because it had been a problem to send planes over Japan. They wanted to get closer airstrips So Saipan helped a little bit, but that happened to be about, I would estimate, about 2,000 miles, well, about 1,500 to 2,000 miles away, which meant the airplanes doing the bombing and so forth over Japan, which is what they wanted to do, would be a problem getting there and back again. So from Saipan, of course, then we had Iwo Jima, and we went to Iwo Jima, which brought us closer to the mainland of Japan, and that was about 700 miles from Japan. And the reason for that is that they had taken islands in the Pacific right nearby in Guam and Tinian, but the planes had trouble getting back again. So by taking Iwo Jima and setting up an airstrip there, if there were any planes disabled coming back, they had a place to land rather than go further, maybe 500 miles further down to Guam or Tinian. And the planes that we worked with were mainly B-29s. I guess they were called Flying Fortresses, I'm not too sure. The B-29s were the biggest plane at the time, and we maintained and repaired that equipment on the B-29s. And we did have planes come back and from Japan that were disabled, and they had a place to land at Iwo Jima, or they landed in the water, water near there. Iwo Jima, we got there, let's see, the invasion was on February 19th, 1945, with the Marines. There were 2 or 3 Marine divisions, and we were at Saipan at that time, and I was watching the casualties, and the people were injured coming off the hospital ships coming back from Iwo Jima down to Saipan. And so, as I mentioned, we went from Saipan to Iwo Jima, and I say we got there about 4 weeks after the invasion, and about a month afterward. And we didn't have to get involved with combat. We lived aboard a ship. I felt very fortunate because we had clean living as compared to what they were exposed to on the island. And the food was okay, the sleeping quarters were fine, we had bunks, if I recall, about 3 or 4 high in very confined quarters, but we had all the comforts of home there anyways compared to what they had on the island. And the only combat that we experienced is the planes attacking us, the ships in the harbor and so forth. And more so on moonlit nights we had to worry about air raids. The alarms went off quite often. Our ship, our guns were going, and we shot down 1 or 2 planes ourselves that were attacking. They had the kamikaze planes, which were suicide planes that would crash into the ships. And so that's the only time we had to worry about it. And of course, at one time we had guns way back when, but they took them away from us when we got aboard that ship. And incidentally, the uniform we wore, if you want to call it a uniform, we wore the same thing as they did in the Navy, the white cap and the jeans and the white T-shirts or blue shirts and so forth. So rather than wear Army garb, we wore that during the day because we were living aboard a ship.
Can you describe the food, and did you have a mess hall on board the ship?
Yes, we had a mess hall there and a kitchen. The canteen where we could purchase things, a very small one. We had a medical staff there, a dentist and a doctor. In fact, I can remember clearly about the doctor because one day I was walking by his quarters after I'm going back to Panama. After we left Panama, when we all went ashore, some of them came back with birds, exotic birds such as parrots and so forth, and one came back with a puppy, a dog, and that was allowed on board the ship, but the birds they had to get rid of, and I happened to witness the doctor we're putting them out of their misery by chloroforming them and killing them. That's the only way we get rid of them. And so we didn't have a medical dentist and then doctor. We had one of our personnel who became a barber, who never had that experience before. So we lived fairly comfortably, really, as compared. We could take a shower as often as we wanted, and the water was salt water, so you could never get a lather with the soap there. It's just very hard water, so they have that aboard there. And on the guns, we had a 5-inch gun on the stern of the ship, which we never had to use. And then we had 20 millimeter and 40 millimeter guns that they shot. By the way, I should mention that after a while, the Navy gun crew left after they trained us how to man the guns on the ship. And we were manning, the Army personnel were manning the guns, and Navy was gone.
Were you responsible for manning any of the guns?
No, that was strictly volunteer. And no, I had no desire to do that. I just wanted to hunker down, and that was it. No, I didn't. I should mention one volunteer situation, though. It's very interesting. By the way, going over, I should mention also, there was Thanksgiving. We had a good Thanksgiving meal aboard the ship, with the turkey and all the fixings. I don't know where we picked them up. We did that. But what I wanted to mention about volunteering is at Christmas time, there's personnel that were assigned to work in the kitchen, washing the dishes, peeling potatoes, and doing all the dirty work in there. And everybody took turns. In my case, well, I should say that to bring. We had, as I said, about 300 Army personnel on there. Out of the 300, there were probably about 15 or 20 of us that were Jewish, including myself. On Christmas Day, all the Jewish people got together and gave the people who celebrated Christmas the day off in the kitchen, and we volunteered. Now, as an officer, they don't have to do that. And I was a sergeant at the time. I never had to be assigned to that. But everybody, regardless of rank, volunteered to work in the kitchen and serve the food, and it was very well appreciated. We heard a lot about that.
That's very nice.
Yeah. Because that was not our holiday, but it was theirs.
So was there a good sense of camaraderie on the ship between everybody?
Yes, mainly with the people that you work with all the time. In my radio and radar repair section, there were about 25 or 30 of us. We lived in the same quarters, and we were very close. We worked together, ate in the same place, and so forth. So, yes, I developed a few good friends. I guess the same as you would do in school. Maybe 4 or 5 good friends there. And one was from Brooklyn, New York. The other one was from Gulfport, Mississippi, and maybe a third one, I can't remember now. So when it came time, prior to all of this, where we went to town and so forth, we went in together. And of course, we kept in touch with each other after the war.
How did you keep in touch with your family during the war?
By mail. There was mail that we mailed out. I happened to start going steady with a girl while I was on furlough, and we were writing. She was 16, I was 19, and we wrote every day practically. We kept in touch with each other. And I just thought of this recently. I don't remember writing to my parents, and I have 2 sisters. I don't remember writing to them, but I had to, and I don't remember them writing to me. The only thing that I could remember is Barbara, who I eventually married after I got out, and I became engaged and so forth. So, and I should go back to the end of the war. The end of the war was in August of 1945. That's when the bomb was dropped. Many people were critical about the atomic bomb and bombing and killing all those people over there, but we looked at it from a different point of view. We knew that the next step was to attack the mainland of Japan, go on to the mainland, and we knew that would be more or less suicide for the Japanese as well as for our army personnel or military personnel. So that was a welcome thing when we found out that they did this, and the war was over, I guess a matter of a week after the bombs were dropped. So from my perspective, I welcomed it. And it saved by doing that, we saved many lives, because there would have been many more lives sacrificed if we did invade the mainland.
How close did your ship get to the mainland of Japan? Did you stay at Iwo Jima?
Well, at Iwo Jima, which I mentioned, is about 700 miles from Japan. And that's the closest we got to it. Yeah, in fact, that's the closest of any military event, although they were in Okinawa as well, which is south of Japan. But I think they were at least 500 miles away. So we never had to get near Japan, other than go over Japan and bomb them, and we were bombing prior to the atomic bomb, too.
On your way to Japan, did you cross the equator?
We crossed the equator, no, but we're going along near the equator. We didn't cross that, just the time zone, that's all.
The time zone. What was your highest rank?
I was discharged as a sergeant. So the ranks are private first class, corporal, and then sergeant. And then there's more beyond that. Mm-hmm. And sergeant was being paid very well. We were getting about $55 a month. Of course, they gave us food, they gave us 2 blankets and our shoes and our clothes and so forth. But I have no regrets about being in the service. It was a good education.
What did you do for entertainment on the ship?
They had movies on the deck there. They had movies, and we went ashore too, because they had entertainment, a group of entertainers belonging to USO, United Service Organization, and they would entertain. They were named people. A few came aboard ship too to entertain us, and so we did that. That was about the only entertainment. They played cards, they gambled, which I didn't carry that too far. I got very depressed. If I lost a small amount of money, I'd be very depressed. So I stayed away from that, and I learned my lesson. Entertainment, that's about it. Movies, and I should mention this. The commanding officer on our ship was a colonel, lieutenant colonel, and his past, he was in World War I in the infantry, and then he lived in Texas. We had a lot of Texans aboard our ship. And he was the Attorney General of Texas. He happened to be an attorney for many years. He ran for governor of Texas and lost at one point prior to the war. So we had a person aboard that ran our organization that was able to control us very nicely because he was a politician. And when, I should mention this, when the war was over in Europe, and we knew that there'd be all kinds of problems and we wouldn't be home too soon, he would have ways of boosting our morale by getting us all together and talking to us and so forth. So he was a character. He was a real character, and very colorful, and he kept our spirits up all the time. He did very well.
Was there any tension between the merchant marines who ran the ship and the Navy? No?
That's a good question. Yes, in a mild sort of way. Merchant marine aboard the ship were paid very well. They were in a combat zone. They got paid very well, and so I said we got paid the normal military rate. So when it came to the gambling, and shooting dice and playing cards and so forth, they had all the money on payday. And naturally, if you play cards or gamble, the one who has the most money and can afford to lose more before they come back again are the winners. So we kind of resented that a little bit, that they got paid very well, and they did very well. The Navy, we had no problem with them. And the man from the Merchant Marine who was the skipper, he was from one of the Balkan, no, he was from Sweden, I believe. And he'd been in the Merchant Marine for many years, so he ran the ship. And our officer didn't have anything to do with the running of the ship. That was their responsibility. And Merchant Marine personnel, we probably had about 25 aboard the ship that took care of the ship.
Now, your job was a radio and radar repairman. What was it like doing that kind of work at the bottom of a ship?
Yes. Our quarters were about midship. The shop that we had set up aboard the ship was in the bow of the ship, the front, below the water line. And it was very easy to work and be seasick at the same time, because especially when we had storms out there, they weren't called hurricanes, I forgot, they weren't called tornadoes. Typhoons, I guess they were called. And we had to leave the harbor and go out to sea to try to avoid them. And while we did that, the conditions working in the shop were very poor, because the ship would go like this and we would go down and go up and so forth. So we got the brunt of it there. And I never got over being seasick. It seems I had a constant headache the whole time. I was seasick at the beginning when we first went over through the Caribbean, and a lot of us were. And then later on I kind of got used to it, but there's always that constant headache above the eye. You got the feeling above the eyes of the headache and so forth. And when you went ashore, which we did fairly often, and you walk on land, you're kind of swaying back and forth automatically, because the ship is always moving. We have that movement on board the ship all the time. And I should mention that we all lived aboard that ship for about 13 months, over a year. And we lived on it completely. When the war was over, we lived on land on Iwo Jima. I would say for about a month or two. The war was over in August. And we lived on land waiting to be assigned to come home. We didn't come home on our own ship. A few people did. And they put us on an aircraft carrier, which was a good experience coming home, because it was massive, it was big. And and then it went very fast compared. Our normal speed aboard the Liberty ship, top speed, is 13 knots, which is probably the equivalent of maybe 15 to 20 miles an hour. And we were going home on an aircraft carrier, the equivalent of about 40 miles an hour. So it was a good feeling. And we went back to San Francisco. Not to California, I should say. San Jose, I think, is where we came in. And that had to be in the month of November. I would like to mention one thing. I mentioned our commanding officer, our colonel. When our morale was down, he guaranteed that we would all be home by Christmas. And here it was in August, and the war was over in Europe, and prior to the time that they dropped the bomb. And he said he guaranteed that we'd be home for Christmas. He said he was not a betting man, but he would be willing to bet anybody that this would happen if we wanted to take up a collection against him, which we did not do. And we thought about that afterward, because he had some knowledge about this bomb. He had to have some knowledge of some kind. And being a politician, he may know the right people who not necessarily said anything about it. It was highly secretive, but they may have said, we have something here that may end the war early. And he did mention that. We thought about that afterward, that he must have had that knowledge. And I should mention one other thing about the ship. We had 2 helicopters on it, and a place for the helicopters to land. And the purpose of that was to get personnel back and forth to the island from in the harbor, or have VIPs come aboard and vice versa. So we did have the 2 helicopters there. And actually one went down. There was an accident there, and we ended up with one. And that stayed with us for the remainder of the time. But I mentioned to people about helicopters in 1945, and they didn't think they were such a thing. But we did have them. In fact, this happened to be manufactured in Bridgeport by Sikorsky. It was a Sikorsky helicopter. It was small, carried only 2 or 3 people, 2 at the most possibly. And I understand from the pilot, I got very friendly with him, is that at times when he had to carry something of any weight, they had to remove a door or remove some of the things on the helicopter to let it fly properly. But we did have helicopters in 1945.
And when you went on shore at Iwo Jima, was there anything there to do or see?
This was what, after our ship, after the war was over, you're talking about?
Yeah, when you lived there.
Yeah, we lived in, well, they had tents set up there, and it was leisurely. We knew the war was over, and it was just a matter of getting us assigned. And it was a priority for certain people to go before others based on, they had a point system. And it was based on the length of time you were in the service, how many battle stars you had, plus a few other factors. I forgot what they were. So our points were high, could have been higher, because I learned afterward that there was paperwork in for another battle star or 2, which would give us more points, but they were never awarded because the war was over. So that's the system they used to get people back, and the ones with the highest points went before the other ones. So Iwo Jima, yeah, we stayed there. The conditions there weren't that good. It was sand. It was, I can't describe. Everything was, it's a volcano island. There was a volcano at one end, which there was a mountain at one end called Mount Suribachi, which is where the flag was raised, that famous scene of the flag. And but there was no vegetation. Of course, everything was destroyed there anyway. There was very little vegetation there, and a very thick, coarse black sand. So it was very hard to walk in. And the Japanese had a big advantage because they were all in Mount Suribachi, which is about, I guess, about 600 feet high, something like that. So, and we landed on the beach. Not we, but the military, the Marines landed on the beach where they just looked down on them, and it was devastation. In fact, I think there was something like 6,000 lives lost there in that battle. Yeah.
Were you, I had a shot of your medals. Do you remember any of them, receiving them?
No, well, they were represented by the ribbons on our uniform, that's all. And then afterward, they were, I guess we had to request them from the military afterward. And there was forms to fill out and so forth. But the ribbons that you see on their chest just represent medals, that's all. And apparently, I think other countries, they wear the actual medals on them, but we just wore ribbons. And
what was the kind of reception you received landing in California once you got home?
I don't remember too much about that. We were very happy to be there. And it was an aircraft carrier, as I mentioned before. And they put us aboard a train. And we went across country in the train through Chicago and so forth. I ended up back at Fort Devens in Massachusetts, where they didn't discharge me at the time. I had a furlough time coming, so they gave me a 2-week furlough to come home and then report back to them. And it worked out that I got home on Christmas Eve, and the family was all there and so forth. The only thing I wasn't used to was the snow and the slush and the cold and so forth, because in the Pacific the temperature was always very warm. In fact, there was one situation where we used to go swimming as a youngster in Long Island Sound down around New London, and we did this on a weekly basis in the summer. And swimming over there in the warm water, I never got used to going back into the salt water that we have here in the Sound. I never could get used to it. It had to be warm water, which of course the closest thing to that would be a lake, and that was it.
What did you do in the weeks and months after you were home? All right, so I went to Fort Devens. They said go home for 2 weeks, come back. They discharged me. I came home, and I decided to take some time off, probably about 3 months. I should mention one thing, though, that prior to the war, I worked, after I graduated high school, well, I worked for G. Fox & Company, a department store in Hartford, a leading department store. And I was a stock boy there, and then worked in other departments. And, of course, the law at the time was that the military were entitled to get their jobs back when they came back after the war. So I went to G. Fox and applied again, and it's very strange because we were interviewed by the owner of G. Fox, which was Mrs. Auerbach. She had a breakfast for returning veterans, a few at a time, up in her penthouse. And I was sitting there with probably about 8 or 9 other people for breakfast with her, and these were all former employees. And she wanted to know our experiences during the war, so each one of us, gave her an idea of what we did and so forth. So when it came to my turn, I said, well, I was working on electronics and doing repair work on electronics. And she said that was interesting. She turned to another fellow sitting near me and she said, George, can you use him in your department? And later on I found out he was in charge of the radio department. We didn't have television at the time. Radio department, records, and so forth. And they had a repair department for repairing radios in the homes. So, which eventually became a television repair as well. So he said, yeah, I could use him there, and that's what I ended up doing. So what I did is they gave me a car, and I drove around Connecticut repairing radios in the homes. And I did that for a while. How long after you got home before you married your wife?
There's a story that goes with that. She had been in college in Boston, and she had been in college in Boston while I was in the service. And I got back, and it was assumed we were going to get married. We talked about it, and we were engaged and so forth. And I was sitting there with her father and mother, possibly, and discussing the date of when we were going to get married. And I got along very nicely with her father, very nicely. And he sat there and he listened to this. He said, no, you're not getting married. And I was in shock. I was in shock. And I said, why? What's wrong? I thought it was me. And he said, no, she's got to finish college first before she gets married. And she had about another year to go, year and a half maybe. And it's a situation where here she waited for me to get out of the service to get married, and then when this came up, and I had to wait for her to finish college, and then she went into teaching after she got out of school here in Boston.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Not right away, no. Now I belong to a few veterans organizations, but that wasn't a priority at the time. And no, I wasn't anxious. In later years, for social reasons, I did join, that's all. Because some of my friends belonged, and I went along with it. But it's not an important factor. So. Although I do benefit from it because I find out there are benefits that are given by the government that I had no knowledge of, and they make you aware of these things. And I did take advantage of the GI Bill, and I learned doing this work, maybe more than half of them were college people and very knowledgeable people. And I had a high school education. I had no desire to go on to college. When I graduated, all I wanted to do was go and work and make money. And it was after the Depression. And but I found I lacked something. When I got home, I found out about the GI Bill. So I did go to college. I was motivated then, and I went evenings, University of Hartford, which was called Hillier College at the time, and I went evenings. It took me 7 years to get my degree. In fact, I remember having my son with me on graduation day, and he was about 4 years old or something like that, and I'm standing there with the gown, the cap and the gown. But I did get it, and I'm very happy that I did do that.
Did your experience in the war affect your thinking on war today?
That's a good question. I can't say I'm a pacifist, but I'm a great thinker about negotiation. And I think negotiation is much better than attacking people and ruining their countries and so forth. And there are ways of doing it. And no, I can't call myself a pacifist, but it's close. And I'll do anything to avoid this, because I think one reason for that is that the people that we were warring against in World War II were the Germans and the Japanese. And we were, I'll use the word brainwashed, but we were told that they were subhuman and they weren't human beings and so forth, and they were more or less like animals, and this is the way we were trained. And apparently to motivate us to do all the killings and so forth. But after the war was over, we became the best of friends. Germany was our ally. Japan, we dealt with them all the time. And I'm thinking that all this warped thinking, it can't be warped thinking, but these were human beings. And if anything, I think we had in common with each other, we do have in common, it's people against people is no problem, but when you get the political end of it, it could be a problem. And these are the people higher up that make us do these things. And I was a liberal, really, very liberal at one time.
Are there any other memorable experiences from the war that you would like to share?
Nothing outstanding. It just, I should mention that about maybe 20 years after the war was over, and we were going into I was going into retirement, and I said, I ought to get together with some of these people that I work with. As I said, there was about 25 or 30 of us, and just get together somewhere. And I started to do research to get I did have addresses, the addresses that they had prior to the war. And I tried to contact them, and word got out that I was doing this from people, of the 300 or 400 people that were other in the organization. And they said, how about having reunions for the whole organization? So I worked on that. I was on a committee, and I did a lot of research. At that time, computers were not that far advanced, but they did have computers at the library. So I was down at the library all the time. In fact, what I did is one day I was in the library when it first started, and I talked to the person there, and I said, do you have any phone books during the 1940s from various cities around the country? Because what I was going to do is look them up in the phone books and try to get in touch with them. And they said, no, we have no such thing. We don't keep them. And maybe things for Connecticut and Hartford and so forth for present day, but that's it. So I was on my way out, and she said, wait a minute, let's try the computer. And they had their computers there, so I went over. I was slightly familiar with computers. And what I would do, if a person lived in Tennessee prior to the war, I would put his name in a computer and put in the state of Tennessee and see how many of the people with the same name I came up with. And then I would send a little questionnaire out to, let's say, 5 people with the same name in that state and say, were you a member of the 2nd ARU? And we're planning a reunion and so forth. And I got results that way. And later on, of course, the computers became more sophisticated. It was easier to locate people. So we did have reunions with husbands and wives. And I would say we would average about 40, 50 people showing up. And what we did is we had it in various cities around the country. So it served as a touring mechanism where if we went to San Francisco, for example, we would be tourists in San Francisco and then have our meetings at the hotel and so forth in the hospitality room. So we got together that way, and that was very good. I learned a lot about our organization from the others that were in other parts of the ship. So we did this every year up until about 3 years ago, until we only got maybe 4 or 5 people there, and that was it. And the reason why people weren't coming is their significant others were sick or in a hospital or in a nursing home or something like that, and they couldn't leave, or they were sick themselves. So we did this for at least 10, 12 years, and we did a lot of good touring, traveling around the country, going to various places. So we did go to Washington, and we went to Philadelphia, and more or less have it oriented towards veterans activities, or veterans, yes, I would say veterans activities. So that was very good, and I made a lot of good friends that way. And my wife was very happy with it. She loved to travel, and got friendly with the other wives, and used to quite a bit. And I should mention that she's in a nursing home now. She has Alzheimer's, has been there over 2 years now, and so I'm home alone. But we had a good life.
Is there anything that we have not covered that you would like to add to this interview?
No, I think we covered everything before and after and during the war. No, that's about covers it, I guess. Unless you have another question.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
And thank you.